Welcome to our program. Today, we invite you to pause for a moment and look beyond the headlines as we explore a story shaped by time, memory, and everyday life. One that reveals how history lives on through places, people, and the quiet moments often left unnoticed.
I still remember scrolling through the news that morning seeing tanks actually rolling down the streets of Havana. For a country that's been so stable, it felt unreal. The government was clearly rattled, deploying the military everywhere.
Yeah, it was wild. Suddenly, there were full-blown curfews, martial law, and these green security zones popping up. The Revolution Palace, even the National TV building totally locked down and covered with machine guns on the roofs. You could feel how tense it was just from the images alone.
What gets me is how fast that quiet, everyday life in Cuba just evaporated. Overnight, people went from cautious optimism to bracing for a crackdown. Those early hours really set the tone for everything that came after.
And honestly, it seemed like the authorities were more scared than the protesters. You don't roll tanks into the capital unless you're truly worried you're losing control. That energy sort of hung over the whole crisis from the start.
Thinking about that first night, it's almost like the blackout helped the protests spread. People in poorer neighborhoods used the darkness to their advantage, building barricades, burning tires, and clashing with the military.
For sure, the whole thing took on this urban guerrilla vibe. The curfew was strict out after 6 p.m. You'd get arrested. Still, folks found creative ways to fight back. I read about people in Matanzas surrounding the last fuel depot, trying to starve the security forces of energy.
It's powerful, that sense of desperation turning into defiance. One quote stuck with me. "If we starve, we die anyway, better to die for freedom." That kind of spirit is hard for any regime to contain, especially when even the military starts to hesitate.
Exactly when the soldiers themselves start worrying about the people's resolve, you know things are serious, and the protests just kept spreading, even with tanks on the streets. That brings up the question, what would the US do if the crackdown got worse?
So, the international angle really heats up here. President Trump basically said, "We've got this freedom flotilla in Florida ready to go if Cuba fires on civilians." That's a pretty direct warning.
And behind the scenes, Washington was sending messages to Cuban generals offering leniency if they refused to crack down. It was this intense kind of chess game. Would Cuba do a Tiananmen-style crackdown, or would cracks in the military show up like the Berlin Wall era?
Tanks on the street might look like strength, but they also scream weakness, like the regime had no other choice left. The international isolation, if a massacre happened, would be devastating. It was a real moment of all eyes on Havana.
That actually reminds me, around this time, similar currents were swirling elsewhere. The Popular Front, Mobirization making their escape in Iran, fighting for survival with US help. It feels like these crises were feeding off each other.
Fast forward to May 6, and Cuba was basically a pressure cooker. Tens of thousands in the streets, cacerolazos echoing everywhere. And then, Santiago de Cuba just exploded, barricades, fires, the whole city demanding basic rights.
Yeah, the blackout made everything even more intense. No power, no relief from the heat, people driven to the brink. Meanwhile, the US dialed up the pressure, cutting off oil from Mexico and Venezuela, and making humanitarian aid this lifeline that bypassed the regime entirely.
It's fascinating how quickly information started spreading too. Advanced satellites, rapid updates, Cuban authorities just couldn't keep up. It put the regime in a real bind, not just physically, but also in the information war.
Absolutely. And then you had scenes of President Diaz-Canel on backup power, trying to calm people who were already past their breaking point. Even some police were refusing to repress the crowds. It really felt like the old order was cracking.
By early May, the writing was on the wall. Cuba could either collapse entirely or attempt some painful reforms just to survive. The US prive cut off every last drop of oil, and even detained Venezuela's Maduro. There was no more outside help coming.
That's when Diaz-Canel blinked. He finally opened the door for talks with the US, though he tried to save face by demanding equality and no interference. But the truth was, Cuba hadn't gotten any oil in months. The East was totally blacked out.
Meanwhile, Trump's team sent $6 million in aid straight through the Catholic Church, making a point about the government's inability to care for its people. It was a clear, almost humiliating signal Havana had lost its grip.
And the choices were stark. Collapse in 2 weeks without oil, or rush through deep reforms privatization, shrinking the military's role to win some relief. It's that classic dilemma, resist and fall or change and survive. The whole region was holding its breath.
Looking at these two paths, total collapse or a kind of forced transformation, it's hard to overstate how historic this moment is for Cuba. Generations have known the island as unshakably stable, and suddenly it's hanging by a thread.
It's almost poetic, really tanks and troops showing both power and fragility. The US choke and rescue tactic, first squeezing, then dangling humanitarian aid, really pushed Cuba into this make or break moment.
And with the world watching, it's not just about Cuba anymore. It's about how international pressure and internal unrest can combine to force change even in places that seemed untouchable for decades.
Whatever happens next, whether deep reform or collapse, it's clear Cuba's future will be written in these weeks. It's a turning point that'll be studied for years to come, and I don't think anyone can predict where it'll end up.